And they're all there to see Cavendish, who was going to win the gold, and Bradley Wiggins, the hero from the Tour de France, and all the rest of it. And of course, they all had these things. And they were taking pictures to send back to their friends. You know where this is going now, don't you? Meanwhile, back to the beginning of my story, what actually got implemented, as opposed to what got specified, was a simple GPRS solution using one network and one network only. So the data feeds were not getting through reliably between the lead bike and the pack because the network was completely congested from people using these things. Okay. This probably would still have passed away without comment. Not great, because the commentators weren't getting all the information they wanted to. If it wasn't for the fact that the particular subcontractor that Olympic Broadcasting Services had asked to do this particular piece of camera work didn't do a great job. If you see the film coverage of this particular race, the camera shots are poor, they zoom out when they should be zoomed in, the angles are wrong. As cycling coverage goes, it was probably the worst bit of coverage in the entire 2 weeks of the Olympics. And most of the camera work was first class, but this wasn't. So, all right, still well, things are still calm. But they got a lot less calm later on because the director of the BBC, so that's the rights holding broadcaster for the UK, decided to blog out to the world that he didn't think much of the Olympic Broadcasting Services coverage of the cycling. And he put it on his blog, where of course everybody could read it. This is where social media gets very dangerous very quickly. Olympic Broadcasting Service, as they normally do, reacted defensively and pumped out lots of messages saying, well, it was all Swiss Timing's fault, it was all Locog's fault, it was all this person's fault, it was all that person's fault. And which, of course, all the journalists picked up. So on Saturday evening, end of day one, remember, my phone is hot. It's either people from outside or it's our comms director who wants to know what the hell is going on. You know, I'm thinking, what? So this goes on for probably another 24 hours. Because the next day, for reasons I still don't understand, and I was actually sat with the IOC's Director of Technology at the time, but the IOC's Director of Communications decided to tell the world that the reason why there was a problem with Manolo's broadcast coverage, by the way, we've gone a long way from data timing at this point, the reason why there was a problem with Manolo's broadcast coverage was overuse of Twitter, which of course makes no sense at all, and made no sense to any of us at the time. Then what happened was the UK technical press got hold of this and ran for probably another 48 hours with stories about how Twitter was damaging the Olympics' ability to broadcast. It was extraordinary. And you know, anybody with an ounce of technical competence would have known it was, you know, complete nonsense. But anyway, that was probably the worst thing going wrong during the actual games itself. You know, stressful moments were around things like the cyber attacks I talked about before, and there were stressful moments just in the run-up to the opening ceremony, probably the last 48, 72 hours before the opening ceremony. You know, that was where, you know, for instance, we had an interference problem between NBC's satellite dish and one of those temporary mobile masts I was telling you about before. You know, so NBC got very upset about this, and major rows to sort out solutions. So we had some of that sort of stuff going on before. But that was, you know, that was the worst moment easily the worst moment during the games itself. Okay. There's one up at the left there.
You mentioned that in 2008, 2009, you had to make a lot of speculations about innovations that would have been done by the time of the games.
Yeah.
Now that you've been to Rio to give them advice, did you suggest things to them that you would think would be relevant for them? And if not, what do you now think will be relevant?
Yes and no. So we shared with them our process and how we got to where we got to. And, you know, we kind of suggested one of the things they need to do was you know, a little bit of intelligent forecasting about where the customers would be. But we didn't go beyond that point, and nor would I want to, frankly. You know, there's nothing more irritating than having your predecessor, if you like, telling you what decisions you need to make. So we stayed away from that. The job of the debrief was not to advise them on how they do things. The job of the debrief was to explain to them how we did things. It's their job to work out how they want to attack it in Rio. somewhat differently, I would think, than the way we did it.
And what do you yourself think now that will be well, the key innovations by then?
I think the whole mobile consumerisation world is only going one way. That'll be even bigger in Rio than it was in London, for sure. I think the expectations around virtual graphics that I mentioned before, both on television and on website, will be pretty critical. But I tell you the other big thing, which was quite an issue for us and will be huge by the time we get to Rio, something I didn't mention during my talk, but one of my areas of budget pressure was around video adjudication. So, you're all familiar with Hawkeye and the tennis, you know, where you get the thing that shows you whether or not the ball actually was inside or outside the line. That kind of technology, obviously it's different by different sports, is spreading right across the array of sports now. You know, goal line technology for football, for example, not that the Football Federation seems to want it, but those kind of technologies are now very available. And one of the late changes we had to deal with at London was the International Federation saying, we want this and we want you to implement it. I think that will be pretty much an expectation for Rio, pretty well across all sports. So lots more technology around helping the judges do their job, particularly in the kind of replay and simulate space.
And there I am again. But another question. The role of a CIO typically is more of a supportive role, in which the IT supports the business in achieving its goals. But we've clearly seen that technology here is more part of the business model. How do you see this change, and how did this affect the CIO in the future?
You're kind of right and you're wrong. Technology is now so critical to most organisations that if the CIO chooses to and has the right kind of personal skill set, there's absolutely no reason why he has to be in a kind of order-taking mentality. He should be sitting, in my view, he should be sitting at the exec table contributing to the business direction alongside, you know, the chief executive, the chief operations officer, whatever. So, for me, you know, in London, yes, we were clearly at one level a supportive role, but actually a lot of the time we were in the lead because we were usually ahead of the pack on most things to do with the delivery of the games. But even in my previous role, you know, it was never kind of my style, frankly, to sit there and just wait to be told. You should be out there strategically contributing to the mission of the business. But there are many different kinds of CIOs out there, and a lot of it's about mindset. A lot of CIOs think of themselves as IT deliverers. They should be thinking of themselves as businessmen who happen to know about IT, and that's quite a big difference in mindset.
So, I can only imagine the amount of parties that have been involved in all the technological aspects. How do you, as CIO, determine with which parties to collaborate in this project?
Okay, that's a really complicated, it's a good question, it's a really complicated answer because some of the parties you have to collaborate with because they have a long-term relationship with the IOC. So for instance, Swiss timing. They are, you are not going to change timing providers from Olympics to Olympics. You get told by the IOC you're going to work with these people. You have to arrange a contract, but you actually have no choice. So you can change the scope a bit, but you can't really change the fact that they're going to do the core timing. Other suppliers you pick yourself, and there's a middle grey area where I mentioned sponsorship was a really important part of this. Unlike most IT decisions, you are not just thinking about somebody who can do the job correctly, you're actually thinking about whether they can contribute to your revenues as well. So the whole decision process around some of our supplier selection was an awful lot more complicated than it would be in, you know, a normal organisation. So that's the top level. I mean, at the more detailed level, I mean, you know, it's no different from a supplier selection in any other circumstance. You know, have they got the capability to do the job both technically and in terms of quantity of resources? Will they do the things they need to do to react properly, because to survive in this environment, a process-bound organisation that can't be sufficiently agile isn't going to work. So you have to convince yourself that the organisation you're taking board understands what it means. You have to know that they're going to be able to bring on enough extra staff during that horrible peak that happens in the last sort of 2-3 months. So those are the kinds of questions that you're asking.
Hello, I was wondering, this was kind of a special experience for you. I mean, you worked 4 years on this then, or if you already got a next project lined up, or what you're going to do in the future?
So I'm not going to do another one of these, that's for sure. The short answer is I don't know. I'm currently doing bits of consulting for a couple of organisations, including the IOC actually, and I'm waiting for the right next job. I've had some interesting offers, but it's very hard to follow the Olympics. So I'm going to give it some time before I move. Thanks.
So it seems the prime concern for the Olympics in technology is availability. And the usual solution to that is simply buy a lot of infrastructure, hire a lot of people, and if you have a lot of overcapacity, things are very hard to go wrong. And we've seen in your presentation that was basically the case for much of the Olympics as well. What other things are important if you want to keep everything available, all your services and infrastructure?
So availability is important. I'd actually say more important than availability was accuracy. That results service has to be bang on. That data you've got in your accreditation system and on your info system and on your internet, which is the official statement of record for everything that's going on in games, has to be spot on. So I put data accuracy above availability in the list. But you're right, resilience is key, and yes, you do spend a lot of money to try and give yourself as much protection as you can around that piece.
Any last question?
Out the front there.
Amongst students, common belief has it that if you do a project, you do the best work in the last 24 hours, especially if you don't sleep in that 24 hours. What are your experience on that? I mean, you have to sleep within those weeks, but do you skip days or?
So one of the challenges, especially for the management team, is to try and balance a few things. You heard one of my, you heard my comment about it's a marathon, not a sprint. That was in the film at the end there. That was something I was saying to the team over and over again, especially before the test events. Because people typically, their typical instinct was indeed to go 48 hours without sleep and just try and get things over the line at the last minute. And actually you can't let people do that very often because they end up burnt out and entirely useless to you. So trying to get people into some good habits, balancing, getting enough time to sleep, seeing their families and all the rest of it. Certainly when you were 6 months out or more, was kind of one of the things we tried to do, not always easily. I have to say, in the last 2 months, it was kind of all hands to the pump, and people were typically working as hard as they could without actually sort of, collapsing in a heap. And there was a lot of long days, a lot of lack of sleep at the end. And that's kind of pretty normal in these kind of environments. That includes me, by the way. I just got insane. But,
Well, thank you very much.
no different from student life, really.
Thank you very much. I think we have concluded this lecture. There will be a drink at the embasement. Most people of you will know where it is. If you don't, just follow the crowd. For you to say. I want to thank you for this interesting lecture, and have a good next project. I would suggest.
Thanks for listening, if you have been.
Ik kan het even een beetje